howdy. My name is Paul K. Lemire. This is Your City, Your Voice on 4680Q. Coming to you live from beautiful downtown Niagara Falls. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we're beholding a lot of beauty here today. The meteorite crater, and our special guest is in here as well. Big shout out to my buddy Mark Lindsay in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who said he was going to listen to the show today. So, Lori, that's our guest today, Lori Lococo, City Councilor and candidate for the next election. Somebody's listening in from Pittsburgh, so, here we go. Let me just see here. So, Lori Lococo is here. How are you doing, Lori?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's a great opportunity to talk to the residents and learn a little bit more about some of the topics. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Pleasure to have you here. Pleasure to have all the people out there listening. Thank you very much for tuning into our show at noon every day, Monday to Friday. And we are going to have more candidates. We got 3 more weeks before the election. And we're going to have every day is lined up with a candidate. So we're coming up to the end of all this. And for the big day on October 24th, of course. So, Lori, I guess... I think everybody knows you in town. Lori is the champion of the citizen. Lori has been out there a lot. I've seen a lot of your signs. I know that some people have whispered in my ear that Lori is going to get the most votes this time around. And I can't argue with them. I'm just sitting there going, well, there you go. Probably wouldn't surprise me. But how did you get to this point? I think that's an interesting story in itself.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's really nice about the top vote getter. I just want to get in the top 8, and that will show me that the residents want me to be where I am. And I'll just give you a little brief history about how I got here. I've always been involved in the community, whether it was helping out Rotary, working with the Literacy Council, working with Women's Place. I've done a lot of volunteer work. And then I got involved in Toastmasters, which is a communication and leadership organization. I was very fortunate to go through all of the different levels of leadership in Toastmasters, and I was finally at the international board. It was a 2-year elected position, and at that stage I was thinking, what do I do next? Do I move forward with Toastmasters to possibly become the president of Toastmasters International, or do I serve my own community? So at that point I thought, I've gained a lot of skills, a lot of experience. Why don't I use that skill and experience within my own community? And I started looking into city council. I did run in 2014, and I came up a little bit short. I was number 9. We take the top 8 vote getters in our at-large system. And I thought, okay, I want to keep on learning. I want to prove that I want to be here. And I attended council meetings for those 4 years. I sat in the gallery taking notes, getting to learn the people at the table, getting to know all of the issues going on in our community. And I did that for 4 years. And then I ran in 2018, and then I was in the top 8 and was elected to city council.
Amazing. I can't even imagine going to every city council meeting for 4 years. I mean, I get about half an hour in, I'm asleep. It's just amazing that you would sit in the gallery and do that. But that's the level of dedication that someone has when they really want to be on city council and help the city. And of course, you were rewarded for your effort, which is awesome.
Thank you.
You've done a great job. From most of the people I talk to are very happy with Lori Lococo, and congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So when we look at it, of course, you're running again to help the people of Niagara Falls. I don't have to ask that question. I asked a lot of people why you're running. Well, we already know. You kind of explained it. When we get to the actual city, though, there are a lot of issues that are floating around out there. And I think the next city council is going to really have to, buckle down and get at some of these issues that have been floating around for a number of years. As far as you're concerned, what would you like to see happen if you were to get elected again? What are the 3 issues that you really want to tackle this time around?
Thank you for that. I think the top 3 for me would be housing, whether that's affordable or accessible housing. I know most people realize that we're in a housing crisis right now. We have people that are on different types of revenue streams, whether that be Ontario Works, ODSP, Old Age Security, CPP, or whether they're working, and they're having a hard time finding an affordable place to live, an affordable, clean, safe place to live. So housing is really important. And in the past, we've always heard that housing and homelessness was a regional issue, not a city issue. And I think through some of the councillors bringing it up in other terms, and through myself bringing it up this term, saying it is an important issue for the city. These are our residents. We have to do something. And I think we've seen the dial change to say, yes, we have to do something. And we're seeing that housing is an important issue to a lot of the candidates. I'm going to give you a couple of statistics. The word affordable housing is 30%, that you do not spend more than 30% of your income on housing. So take, for example, almost 50% of the households in Niagara Falls make less than $60,000. That's a staggering statistic. Almost 50% make less than $60,000 for a household income. So let's take that $60,000 figure, and if you take 15% of that, that is $1,500 per month that you should be spending or less on your housing. We know that people are spending way more than $1,500. They might be fortunate and have found a unit, a rental apartment, or ownership previous that maybe they're spending less than 15. But if you're looking for something right now, it's very, very difficult to find something. So housing's really important.
Yeah, I think anything under $2,000 right now around for a place to live is almost a bargain in Niagara Falls. $1,500 is it's possible, but you don't see a lot of that.
And that could be with two people, a household, two people making $60,000. So can you imagine someone who is on their own for whatever amount they're making, and then to spend 30% or less on their affordable housing? So that could be very difficult.
Yeah, I would say probably some people $1,000 would be a lot, even for them. And so speaking of that, while we're on that subject, right across the street we have my favorite meteor crater. I haven't seen my favorite Martian come out of it yet, but there is something going in there. I hope soon, because I want to put up a sign and open a hot dog stand over there if they don't fix it up. But I heard there is something going on over there. Do you know anything about that? Or
Yes, I know a little bit. I don't know timelines, but when we were looking at affordable housing, homelessness, and we had that property over there, the city and city council decided that we would donate that property to the region, and the region would work with it to build apartment building. And this apartment building would have 20% of affordable units in it.
Nice.
And so if you think about a 100-unit apartment, 20% would be 20. I think it's going to be over 200 units, if I'm correct, and that would be 40 units. The thing about having it down here is A, that the city owned that property, and B, I think it will help revitalize the downtown area as well. They always say that if you have people living in an area, then the amenities start to come. You would get a grocery store, your transit would change, you get all of the entertainment things coming along with it. So I think it's a great project, but I'm not sure of the timing. I think that there has been a few delays in it, and but it is a great project.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it actually down here. I think it'd be a good thing for downtown, and I think it would be a good thing for people who do want some affordable housing to be able to move into it.
Yes.
While we're on that subject, let's talk for just a second about one of your favorite things, and that is small houses. And I know you and Carolyn Iannone went to Texas, I believe. Am I right in that, to take a look at this
Yes.
this situation? And you were kind of amazed when you were down there.
Yes. I've heard about tiny homes for many years, but there is a community in Austin, Texas, and Councillor Iannone and myself went down to Austin, Texas, and it's called Community First. I think the thing that we really came away with was that you can't just give someone a unit, a house, an apartment, and expect them to thrive if they don't have the skills and the resources that they need. And what this what happened in Austin, Texas was that they had all of the resources right there on the community. They had EMS, they had drug addiction counseling if someone needed it. There was a church, there was micro business opportunities for people to have their own businesses or opportunities for them to work. It was a community. And once you have that community and the resource, then people start to thrive in living in it. And they were tiny homes. Now I know Texas has very different climate than we do here. But in the past years, there's been a lot of tiny homes that have been altered to survive our winters. Now, when I say tiny homes, a lot of people just think about homeless people, and that could be used for that. That is true, it could be used. But what we could also do is use, and I'm going to relabel tiny homes to smaller homes, because there's a lot of opportunities for residents to live in a smaller home. But our old laws, our old bylaws would say your lot size needs to be a certain size before you can build on it. Your home needs to be a certain size to build it. And what we're in the process of doing, we passed a housing report in August. We're looking at all of those bylaws to say, well, maybe somebody doesn't need a 3,000 square foot home. Someone could live with a 500 square foot home. And some of them were 384 square feet, some of them were 700, and they were quite comfortable. They could be comfortable for a single person, possibly a couple. It all depends on what's going on in their life and whether they can do it. And some of the people who are struggling from mental health or homelessness, they don't need a very large place to live. And I think these smaller homes are a great opportunity to look at for our community, and I did bring a motion forward that our city look at all of these things, whether it be a tiny home, a smaller home, something with wheels, sort of like an RV, but some of the tiny homes are on wheels. Some of them could be put on foundations. You could look at other options like shipping containers. There's lots of options, and we really need to open up our mind and be creative, because we're missing the boat for a lot of people.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that, I had a place at Shirkston, and it was 500 square feet. It was a park model home, whatever they want to call it. It was 40 by 12, 480 square feet, and you could pack a lot of stuff in there and live there quite comfortably, because I find most houses you accumulate a certain amount of junk, and but there you're pretty clean because you have what you need, and that's about it. So 500 square feet, although it doesn't sound like a lot if you're living in a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot home, believe me, you can do a lot in one of those. And this had 3 bedrooms, full bath. It was just nice living room, the whole shot, nice kitchen. So it's possible. Now, some people say that these things end up being money pits, though. They just end up costing for repairs, and they just keep sucking in the money. They're a black hole for money. Did you find that down in Texas? Was there anybody who said anything like that there?
No, I haven't heard that before, and I've done a lot of research, not just the tiny homes in Texas, but even Home Depot in the U.S., you can rent, pay monthly for a tiny home to be delivered on a lot. So yes, you need to have a lot to put it on, but I haven't heard that about the renovations. It's like anything. It's just a house. It's just smaller. And the tiny homes, just like the word affordable housing, tiny homes and affordable housing definition have changed over the years. Right now we're just looking at something smaller, but it would have all of the amenities. One of the challenges could be with a smaller home is that it does cost the same amount of money to bring your sewer systems, your hydro, as a large home. That's not going to be any cheaper, and then there's the cost of the land. So we have to look at those types of things as well. I know that the city of Niagara Falls, in addition to the Park Street meteor behind us, has also worked with the region, and the city donated the old library on the corner of Victoria Avenue and Armory Street.
Oh, right.
And that's called transitional or bridge housing. So I'd like you to think about a continuum of someone from being homeless right up to home ownership, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, whether it's day programs for a homeless person, whether it's renting out a unit in a motel, whether it's renting an apartment, renting a house, or home ownership. So that's the continuum, and what the city has done is donated that. The region is running the program, and they will take people who are chronically homeless. They don't go by the Niagara Regional Housing List because they're looking for specific people that need to acquire certain skills and need resources in order to eventually live independently. and there's 25 beds there. People will go in and the resources will be provided for them. You have to think, if somebody's been out on the streets living rough for 5 or 10 years, they might not know how to cook any longer. They don't know how to do laundry. So there's these types of skills. There might be mental health involved, and those resources are right at Victoria Avenue. The idea is that once they work with the skills and the resources that they need, then they could go to the next level that the region has provided. They purchased a motel on Buchanan Avenue, and that is to be permanent housing. So it goes from someone who's homelessness and needs some resources. They go to our transitional bridge housing, learn about the skills and the resources that they need, and then they go to a more permanent situation. And it doesn't have to be that particular motel, but they could. That there is that option.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And I think that is a good point, that people lose the ability to do some of these things because they haven't done them in so long, and to get them back into the flow and make it, at the end of the day, excuse me, at the end of the day, make it more comfortable for them when they do get into more of a permanent situation. They have to be able to do these things to take care of themselves, and that's fantastic that they're training them. It's like that teach a guy to fish, and he fishes for a lifetime. Give him a fish, and he eats for a day, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's that kind of a thing.
It sort of goes to the theory that you can't just give someone a unit and expect them to succeed if they don't have the tools and the resources. So our region and our city and a lot of the social services realize we have to give those services. We can't just keep giving a motel room and expect someone to be able to thrive in it without the resources that they need.
That's fantastic. Your second issue that you'd like to tackle once you get back, if you get back. I mean, we can't just take for granted, but
I never take anything for granted, and that's why I'm out here talking to people and knocking on doors, going to different organizations and learning what the residents want. The second one for me is development, and what I will say about development is that it be sustainable. We need development in our community in order to increase the revenue that's coming into our community. We have certain guidelines and targets that the region and the province give to us about the number of people that will be moving into Niagara Falls. Well, if we have more people moving into Niagara Falls, we have to be able to provide more housing units for those people, and we have to be able to provide areas for employment opportunities as well. So sometimes I feel that these targets are conflicting with some of the other things. We need more units to have more people, but we also have to be sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean that we can't keep depleting our resources because we're not going to have any left, and we're just going to be in a huge challenge later on. So we have to be balancing all of that. There's a lot of different things that we can look at. I know the city recently expanded the urban boundary to build more units outside, and I'd like the listeners to think about a circle around Niagara Falls, and all of the services within that circle are provided by the region. That's transit, that's water, wastewater, those types of things. When you expand an urban boundary, now you have to provide those services outside of that boundary, and it becomes very expensive. Now, there is a theory about development pays for development. If a developer wants to put a development outside of that urban boundary, the theory would be that that developer would pay for those services. So that works out to a certain extent, but we have to look at the long term. All of those things, whether it be the road, the bridge to get there, the sewer systems, they all have an expiration date. That could be 5 to 50 years depending on what it is. Well, when it needs to be repaired or replaced, then all of the taxpayers and ratepayers in Niagara Falls end up paying for that. Now, the flip side of that is that new development is bringing in taxes as revenue. So they're bringing in property taxes. So we have to make sure that there's that part. And the third thing which ties into this is the environment for me. I think development and the environment are sometimes competing against each other. We often have developments on very large pieces of property that have maybe provincially significant wetlands, large areas of trees, wildlife, and what happens often is the trees get cut down, the developer comes to city council for approval of the development, and the trees are already gone. So I did bring up a motion to investigate in having a tree bylaw. We do not have a tree bylaw here. And how I found out about that was a lot of residents would call me and say, Lori, they're cutting down a whole bunch of trees behind this property. I would call the city and they would say, well, we don't have a tree bylaw. It's covered under the region. I'd call the region and they would say, well, where is this property? And then they would say, well, our forestry definition under the Forestry Act for us to preserve trees would be 1 hectare of land with 1,000 trees a certain diameter. Or you could go down to 750 trees, but a bigger diameter, and then you could go down to 500, bigger, and that sort of thing. And every time I called, they kept saying, Lori, this property doesn't fit that definition. Sorry, we can't preserve the trees. And then I got to thinking, well, if every time I call and you tell me that you can't preserve the trees, maybe we need to look at the definition of what we're going to preserve. So my motion was also about a private tree bylaw, but it was also about looking at the forestry definition. So we could preserve more trees, and it was also about the tree canopy. When we keep cutting down the trees, what a tree canopy is when trees are close to each other or touch. And the experts say that we should have about a 30% tree canopy. And right now, because of our data, we are only at about 17 or 18% in Niagara Falls. And that's part of the challenge, is that we do not have a proper inventory of trees to find out where are we. And that is the other thing that we're going to be doing, is investigating in our inventory to find out exactly where we are.
So just about procedure with development. When you sit on city council and you look at a development, what is the process for you to say yay or nay to that certain project?
Great question. I look at every single development application as that one. I don't look at who the developer is, what did they do before, how much money do they have. I don't look at that. I look at it as a site specific. But then I also look at how does that application affect the surrounding areas, because what I'm seeing happen is we might have 5 pieces of development all side by side, and we're looking at one piece and not considering the rest of the pieces. That this development might have 1,000 new units, this new second development might have 800 units, the third development might have 800. So sometimes we have to look at the bigger picture for the ones in the area, but I like looking at them individually. And it's sort of a weird process. What often happens is when a developer comes to the city, they're working with our city staff for long periods of time about what they want to do. There's applications, there's permits, they get consultants, there's engineers, and they work on the whole process. And then there's an open house to let people know, the residents, about what's going on. The residents would come there with their questions, with their concerns, and sometimes the developer will change some of their project to address some of their concerns. Sometimes they don't. And then the application comes to city council later. That could be a couple of months, it could be a year. So for me as a councillor at the beginning, I was trying to go to all of the open houses to understand what the residents wanted or didn't want. And then what would happen, there'd be this long gap in between, and then it would finally come to city council, and the proposal could have been different than the first one. So what I've tried to do, just because of time is so important, the best use of my time was not going to a lot of those open houses. Unless they're very contentious, I usually don't go to those open houses. Learn what the residents are thinking, talk with them, and then when the application comes, then I look at that. I also try to look at, past history about how we voted on certain things, how it's connected with other applications around it, what else is coming down the pipe, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I know that there's a notion that when a development goes in, that the infrastructure that should be there with it isn't ready for it yet. And somewhere down the road it will be, but there's always that complaint, oh, there's more traffic and there's more this and that. They're opening this, they're opening that, they're building this plaza, that plaza. And a lot of people, are always talking about that. There's so much traffic now, they shouldn't have put that there, they shouldn't have allowed that. But sometimes the municipality's hands are tied by, well, it used to be OMB and then it went to LPAT, now it's OLT, I think. So, I mean, your hands are a little bit tied with that, because even if you turn it down, it can go to that that route, and,
Yes.
and no matter what you've done, right?
You bring up a good point, and then I'll address the OLT. You talk about us having the infrastructure in place in order to have the new development. It's sort of a catch-22. The new development brings in new infrastructure, but if the existing old infrastructure is unable to handle it, we sometimes have some problems. And I'll give you a great example. I've talked to many residents in Chippewa that are having some problems with infrastructure. They have flooding backyards, flooding basements. The flood wrecks their basement and all of the belongings. They've lost years of mementos, so that's an issue. They can't flush the toilet properly at certain times, and we talk about wet weather. It might be fine when it's dry weather, but when it's wet weather, you have flooding. So I sort of have a challenge with all of this because our staff say that we have certain things in place to address it, but the residents, specifically in Chippewa, saying, I really don't care what your staff says, come and see my basement, there's flooding in it. And one of the other issues with some of the residents is they can't get insurance any longer. Once the flooding keeps on happening, their insurance won't cover it. So we definitely have some issues in Chippewa, and one of the things that we're looking forward to is the South Niagara wastewater treatment, which is going up towards Rexonmuir Road. The challenge with that is it might not be ready for another 5 to 7 years. So what do you tell someone who's living in Chippewa that has a flooded basement? Well, this wastewater treatment plant 5 years from now will help you. What's going to help them in the interim? So I want to be very cautious when I'm looking at development applications for Chippewa, keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and of course we're facing a big one with Oaklands. So speaking of the devil, there it is, right there, right? That development is kind of really being looked at closely.
Yes.
Whether you can stop it or not is another story. That's the problem. You have good intentions,
Yeah, I think a lot of residents are at the point knowing that development has to happen. They just feel that it could happen in a different way. They know the developer is there to make money, and that's the point of it. We have certain guidelines and targets of what we have to reach, certain number of houses per year to reach that goal. So, we have to balance all of that, and a lot of the residents are not saying no to development. They're just thinking, rather than put the PSW at risk, why don't you move your development a little bit over this way, and there won't be so many challenges. It could help wildlife and that sort of thing. And I just wanted to get back to, you were talking about the Ontario Land Tribunal. As a counselor, we look at these applications that come to us, and the OLT is basically, it's called the Ontario Land Tribunal, and if the applicant or a resident do not like the decision that the City Council makes, they can appeal it at the Ontario Land Tribunal. What happens at the Ontario Land Tribunal is they look at planning guidelines. They will only award an appeal if it is opposite to planning guidelines. So if the province or the region gives us certain planning guidelines, if the city has put certain zoning on pieces of property, as a city councillor, we have to follow those guidelines. And if someone didn't like it, it goes to the OLT. The OLT will look at those guidelines. Did we not did we not follow the guidelines, the zoning, the bylaws? Then they might appeal it. But if somebody comes and says, oh, I don't like change, or there's too much traffic, that's not a planning argument per se. The challenge I have with the OLT is there is a figure out there that 97% of the cases go in favor of the developer. And I know Premier Ford has come out with a housing task force, affordable housing task force report in February, and one of the changes that he wants to make is to the OLT, and that was going to be that if you are not the developer, or the specific resident right there, it would cost $10,000 to appeal it. So if you didn't like it as a resident, you could not appeal it. Now I understand the premise behind it. They don't want vexatious appeals, but I think that that's really cutting down the opportunities for people to be concerned and put in an appeal. $10,000 to do that is a lot of money. The other challenge I have with the OLT is it is the same government of the sitting government. Now, I'm not a party political person. It doesn't really matter which which party is sitting in. Right now we have a conservative provincial government. The OLT is a conservative body and will follow the conservative guidelines of what they want. So it's not a third party, it's not an independent party, so that becomes a little bit difficult as well. So those are some things as a city councillor that I'm looking at when I look at an application. Would it go to the OLT? And sometimes, you have that in the back of your head that could be an issue, and then sometimes you just have to say this isn't right for certain reasons. I might have to vote against it or vote for it. There's a lot of processes that go into it for me.
Yeah, and I mean, a protester to the OLT, a lot of times it results in the people who are going there and appealing getting certain concessions that end up being good for them. I mean, we did one, well, it was the OMB way back when, and although we couldn't stop the development, we did get some concessions that made it good for the people who were living around this development, like setbacks and things like that, how high they were,
yes,
and density in that piece of property. So yeah, a lot of times you can't stop it, but you can, if you have a good case, get some concessions that'll probably make you happy. But it's pretty hard to stop development, especially when the mandates come down regarding density and infilling and that kind of thing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and just back to the development, just for a second before we move on. I know a lot of people have the notion that the Niagara Falls gets ripped off by these developers and they don't get the money they should be getting and the roads don't get fixed and that kind of thing. I mean, I've heard it a million times, right? We get burned, the city council. Is there any truth to that, or is it just another perception in Niagara Falls that people just like to talk about?
I think it's a little bit of both. From a staff perspective, the report will outline certain things that the developer is supposed to do, and if council approves that, then those are supposed to be done. What I have found when there's issues with residents after the development, a lot of times there's an expiration date, it was too late, that it can't be fixed, or staff and our guidelines say that it's not applicable. So maybe grading, a lot grading, for example, if someone's property is getting a lot of water pooling on it. So there's certain things that we can help with, there's certain things that we can't. And a lot of times the answer is, well, it's the developer and the resident, it's a litigation issue, it's not a city issue. And I do have a challenge with that, because as a city councillor, if we're approving something to you next door, I think we have a responsibility to the person next door that it is going to be done the way it's supposed to. And a lot of times I think there is some truth to it, but there are certain guidelines and restrictions and things that the developer needs to do. We're on top of it. We follow through. We make sure that they do it. Sometimes challenges come up years later, and then that's when there's some issues as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for that good answer. This is Paul Calamere, Your City, Your Voice. We're here with Lori Lococo, current City Council member, running for City Council as a candidate again on the election October 24th, and we're on 4680Q. Okay, just moving on to crime in the city. We talked about crime. We've seen shootings and stabbings and that kind of thing, and they seem to be becoming more prevalent. Any thoughts about that? How we can stop this? Is it a matter of paying for more police and giving the region more money for policing, or is it a matter of allocation? What do you think on that?
I think it's a very complex issue. So you look at the city, Niagara Regional Police is part of our Niagara Regional budget. So we have a two-tier government, so there's that. And I think people all across Canada are experiencing some of these challenges. It's just not in Niagara Falls. We do live in a border town, so we're definitely going to have some more issues than maybe a city who's not a border town. We do have 2 casinos as well. And mental health is a challenge for a lot of people right now, and guns are more available to people right now. when you look at all of those, I think that there are some things we can do as a city council. I think working with BIAs within communities, whether that be security cameras, security guards, making our residents and businesses feel more safe. I also think that not necessarily increasing the funding to the police, but reallocating it into different pots, different sectors of what we really need. It's a challenge all over the country, and I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I really think that we need to have that conversation. Our residents want to feel safe, and I think it's important that our city council recognize that we are having some of the challenges and then start digging into what we can do. As a city councilor, I don't have all of the answers for every single issue that comes to me. We rely on staff, we rely on each other to have different ideas and find out what can be done. So I think it's a conversation that we need to have. I don't want it swept under the rug. We are having challenges. It's not to say that Niagara Falls is unsafe. I think that we could just feel a little bit safer if we put some things in place. And I think I'd like to start having those conversations to figure out what are those things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are, when they keep reading this stuff in the paper and that, there is a little bit of concern out in the street. In certain areas of the town, so it could be just upping the policing and maybe in those areas until everything calms down, because that seems to be one of the solutions, is more presence, police presence.
People, a lot of people talk about on the beat. I'm sorry, what's the having
walking the beat.
Walking the beat. That police officers would walk the beat, then that is a deterrent for things to happen. It's also we talk about some of our trails and our parks, and people say, oh, I don't want that close to my house. There's going to be some illegal activity going on. But realistically, when you have more people in an area, you have less crime, because there's more people watching, there's more cameras, there's more people walking through, and people who are doing illegal activity don't like hanging around where people are. So we have to look at those as well. So I'm definitely open for the conversation of figuring out what are some of the possibilities that we can do. It's not just a municipal problem, it's a regional, provincial, and federal when you talk about drugs, guns, those types of things as well.
And the other thing I hear a lot, and these are kind of just perceptions around town, right, is that our infrastructure is really bad in this town. The streets suck. It's terrible everywhere. City doesn't do anything. And then we get into a natural conversation about us, the city residents, versus them, the guys in the big hotels down on that end of town. Not that far, but maybe a mile away from here. There's a perception there that they get more than us, and I hate hearing it, because I drive around town and I curse this city because there's construction everywhere and it drives me crazy. I gotta go here, gotta go around this, go around that, right? And I'm going like there's too much construction, but obviously people don't feel the way I do,
I think some of our residents definitely feel that some of our attention and money are going too much to the tourism industry and not enough to the residents. That is their perception. They have certain things that they want, and they might not be getting it. They have certain things that they want to do. There has to be a balance of our money that goes to tourism and to our residents. To me, our residents are the people that live here all year round and could be inconvenienced when the tourism are here. Tourism is very important. A lot of our residents, there were 40,000 people that work in the tourism industry. We found this out during the pandemic, that it was just like a light switch. They weren't able to work. So I think we need to look at different industries about bringing different types of jobs to our community. That's a bigger picture conversation. We definitely need to do that. But perception is reality. If somebody feels that all of the money is being put into the tourism industry, that is their perception. It might not be accurate. We do try to look at different things, and we only have a certain pot of money as well, and we have to make decisions where are we going to spend our money. Every single piece of infrastructure has a certain expiration date, as I mentioned earlier. One of the things that the Ontario government has made it mandatory for every municipality is to work on an asset management plan. And what that is listing all of your infrastructure as an asset. The roads, the bridges, the buildings, you have to go through and say, what is the condition? When does it need to be repaired? Because what we've often seen happen in previous years is we've left a building and it sat too long and then it couldn't be repaired and then they tore it down. And there's a lot of controversy about tearing down heritage buildings, but this management plan, asset management plan, I think is a good thing because it really focuses our attention on the condition and the repairs and how much that's going to cost. So if we look at that, then we can start seeing the roads in certain areas. How old are they? Do they need to be repaired? How much is it going to cost? A stitch in time saves 9. If we do things earlier, then we won't have to do so much later and it will cost so much. So I think that is a great asset to our community, that we're going through that asset management plan, and I think we're going to learn a lot about our the age and stage and the value of each of our assets. And hopefully through that we will be able to address some of the concerns of the big potholes. And again, because we're a 2-tier system, we have some regional roads and we have some municipal roads. So there's that as well.
Well, I think that maybe in neighborhoods where they're complaining about people speeding, they should bring back the potholes. That always slows people down, right?
Yes, that would slow them down.
Yeah. So potholes maybe are the answer. Bring them back. Bring back the potholes. When we talk about the budget, we've really been up against it. And you're talking about the budget having enough money to do all the streets and doing this asset management. So you kind of know where you have to go first. I think when we look at doing these roads, people forget. They see the top of the road, but there's a lot of stuff underneath them. And while you're peeling off this road to replace it, there's infrastructure underneath that is old as well and has to be done. So the cost escalates very fast. And your budget dollars, your capital budget, the ones that you use to do these repairs, gets eaten up really, really fast. And the last 2 years, we haven't had about $50 million out from the casino, our take. How is City Council going to overcome that? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because you're going to be facing the budget, or whoever gets on City Council is. I shouldn't take for granted again. Whoever's there is going to be facing the budget. Excuse me, probably right away, because that's going to come up really fast. I think your next meeting is going to be, like, they get sworn in November 15th, and your first meeting is in December. Is that correct?
I think that is correct.
Something
and
like that.
Usually the December agenda is not too large or too heavy. I think starting in January we'll start to have those discussions. Staff will be working on putting a capital budget together, and then it will. I don't know if it will be brought to the December meeting, but we will be working on it. You brought up a couple of good points. The casino money. We're very fortunate. We would get anywhere from $20 to $25 million per year. And when the pandemic hit, there was one point that we were getting no money. And as the pandemic proceeded, some of the money started coming back. I know that there's been discussions at City Council about not using the casino revenue for our regular day-to-day capital expenses, that we should only use it once it comes in, and use it for additional things. Now that sounds great. The downside of that is then that puts more pressure on our taxpayers, that our taxes would go up. But then you have that money to use for other things. So I definitely feel that we should not be using our OLG money, Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation money, for those types of things as part of our regular budget, because look what happened. So that's one thing. Our treasurer, along with our CAO, is working towards a plan to slowly take that OLG money out of our budget, so we don't do that. Because if we did it all at once, there would be a huge tax increase to everybody, and that's just not feasible. So what we're trying to do is work towards that. The other part of the budget is knowing the status, as I was talking about the asset management plan, knowing the status of where everything is. And then we start to look at where do we want to spend our money. I think we need to look at different things. Our community is changing. We have a high population of seniors in our community. So I really do believe that our focus needs to change about where we're spending money on our seniors. That could be programs such as accessibility, that could be recreation programs, that could be rebates on tax and water, which we do have some now. But I really think that if we look at the percentage of our seniors within our community, we have to address our programs and services to meet those. So that's important as well. When we're looking at our budget, we also look at different levels of services. Sure, we could go out and plow every single sidewalk in Niagara Falls, but there's a cost to that. And then the taxpayers pay for that. So there's a balance between, do we do it every single day as soon as the snow falls, or do we have a certain guideline of when we start plowing? So it might be, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number, but maybe it's 4 centimeters. Let's just say 4 centimeters for this discussion. So once it hits 4 centimeters, we would go out and start doing the snow plowing on our sidewalks. Maybe we only have certain sidewalks that get plowed. So everything has a price tag, and we're always balancing what do our residents need, how much does it cost, and what would be a good level. You can't have everything and you can't have nothing. It has to fall in between there. So those are a lot of discussions. And again, we really rely on our staff to supply us all of that information about their particular, whether it's municipal works, whether it's snow plowing on our streets, whether it's how much a park would cost, how much the cemetery costs to maintain. We rely on our staff to give us all of that information. And then for me personally, I try to do additional research because the information that is given is from one perspective, and I always like looking at other perspectives.
Yeah, and we have a unique situation in Niagara Falls, of course, because people would get very confused. We have regional roads and we have city roads. And the region runs by a different set of mandates from the province
Correct.
Than the city does. So
Yes.
they see a plow going down there and say, oh, they're plowing this street. You know, how come our streets aren't getting plowed? Well, they're not the same under the same regulations. So although region has their times, they have to plow the streets. So they have different because they're main streets.
Yes.
And, you know, the suburbs, of course, the Crestons like mine, where I live, they get plowed maybe last because on the pecking order, we are the least important of all the streets that have to be done. So I had Mary Ann Tickey in here.
Yes.
And she's fantastic. I'm going to get her in again before the snow flies because I think it's so important, that message to people. So the counselors don't have to get these phone calls. I think when people understand things, it's a lot better for everybody, including counselors, including city workers, including staff. Everybody has it easier when people understand the way everything works in the city. And speaking about that, transparency. How transparent do you think this city council has been over the last 4 years?
Transparency for me is really important. I think everything that we're doing should be transparent to our residents. There's certain things that have to go in camera, whether there's certain guidelines within the Municipal Act about what we can go in camera. And in camera means away from the public, that we're talking about specific issues, and that would be litigation, sale or acquisition of property, and an identifiable individual. Those are the 3 things that we can go in camera. Other than that, we should really be transparent and responsible to our city residents to let them know what's going on. Sometimes there's challenges with timing, and I know our new CAO has given some advice about what we can do about bringing certain reports to council after they've come to in camera. So once we've made the decision, then those reports can come to residents. And I think that's great because it gives the residents more idea about what is going on, what decisions we made. You might not understand why we made those decisions, but the end result would be public. So I'm really glad that we're doing that. As for transparency, it's really hard sometimes to understand what is, where were you, what was said in camera, what you can't say. I try to be as transparent as I can. When a resident asks me for something, I go to our staff and try to get the information and pass that along. We can always do better. In camera is definitely a challenge for some people. They think that we're having too many in camera meetings. If you do look at our agenda for in camera, it will clearly outline the reason that we should be there. Sometimes perceptions are, oh, well, that shouldn't be in camera, and that sometimes happens. But I think we really need to follow those guidelines, make sure that we are only talking about those issues.
Yeah, and like I say, the better everybody, the voters, understand exactly how this all works, the happier they are. I guess that's the only way to put it, right? If they think there's something shady going on, or it doesn't matter. It's just that perception, whether it's true or not, it gets passed around, and then before you know it, you have all kinds of weird things being said, which aren't true.
Sometimes at a council meeting, we have our agenda. Our agenda is posted online. People can have the opportunity to go through the agenda and read, but realistically, a lot of residents don't read that. And if they tune in to our council meeting online, they might just see the very brief outline of what's happening, and then we vote, but they don't really understand what's going on. So sometimes as a councillor, I would like to bring a little bit of attention to what's actually going on, so people understand what's going on, because if you don't read it, they won't understand what's going on. So I might try to pick through the information and bring pertinent information so the residents can find out, and that's part of that transparency. It's not really that the information wasn't available, it's just realistically how many people access the information. So if you just take 1 or 2 minutes to explain something during the council meeting, that I think helps people as well.
And I want to do those shows again where we take the agenda and rip it apart, because I think that a lot of people, they just read the paper the next day and they really don't get the flavor for how city council flows and how everything is decided and what's put off until they can get some input from their staff and that kind of thing. They defer a lot of stuff, and some of these decisions that are going down, it's all explained there, but nobody really watches enough to get a feeling for it. So
Yeah.
I'd like to do that again and go through expenses and stuff like that.
I think that was great when you did that and broke apart the agenda. Not only did it give an idea to residents about what was going to be talked about, then it gave them the awareness that if they wanted to learn more, they can get the information or watch it later on. I wanted to go back to one thing you said about construction, that we're driving around and we're seeing all the construction. In our minds, oh my gosh, it's such an inconvenience, construction all over the place. But look at the flip side. When we see construction, it means that good things are happening. We've invested in our infrastructure to make it better. We have jobs, we have good paying jobs, people are working. So there is a flip side. I know it is an inconvenience, and sometimes, as you said, you just see the top layer of the road. You don't realize all of the infrastructure below. It does get very complex, and we're running into supply chain. We're running into work shortages as well. Sometimes things take longer. But I think in general, seeing the construction, it's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. Right after it's finished, I got a big smile on my face. Portage Road has been blocked off for a long time there in front of the hospital. It drives me nuts because you got to go around and, cross the 420. Is that what it's called now? 420, or is it some other name for it? Highway, Veterans
Highway,
Memorial
but it's also
Highway.
the 420 because it needs a number.
That they changed it because of 420. The meaning of 420 around here. But anyway, so when it's finished, I'm happy. You go straight through. It's all beautiful. Prospect Street is all nice. Yeah. So I love after it's done. It looks so good, But before, it's like, oh, my money, I got to go around here. And
yes,
all these other streets get backed up, of course, because you can't use the main one. So, but yeah, when you see construction, that's your money going towards repairing infrastructure and putting in the new roads that you're asking for. So
exactly.
So the more you see, the more you're inconvenienced. Go home and be very happy. And if they could pass a bylaw that people have to use their turn signals in the city, I would be a big proponent of that. Because they don't use them a lot around here. Wards, the ward system. It's always a question. People have been asking me and talking about that. You in favor of the ward system, or would you be in favor of that?
Personally, I am in favor of the ward system. I've looked at both systems from a resident perspective and a candidate's perspective. There's pros and cons to each one of them. I do personally like the ward system, and one of the reasons I do is often residents will call me and say, I don't know who to call. I have this issue. Who's my ward counselor? And sometimes they don't even realize that we don't have wards. So I am in favor of the ward system. And from a candidate's perspective, running in an at-large system is very difficult. It's like you're running a mayoral race that you have to get to the whole city. But if you were working within a ward system, you would be connecting with a smaller part of the city and be able to connect with those residents and those businesses. I think there's more accountability when there's one person or two. Some wards have two people in different municipalities. When you have one or two people that you know you can count on, those are your people to go to. Some people say that, well, maybe you're not getting the best of the best when you're in a ward system because maybe there's only 2 or 3 people running. Someone can run in a ward system that doesn't necessarily live in that ward. So I live downtown, I would run in downtown, but that doesn't mean I couldn't run in a Stamford Center ward if we had wards. And you could choose to do that. But at the end of the day, it's that person that is responsible to those residents. So there are a lot of pros, I think, for a ward system. There is a whole process of changing. We used to have wards. We went to an at-large system. A lot of residents are talking about wanting to go back to the ward system. There is a long process about what to do, and a resident did ask our city clerk for it, so I do have it. It goes from having a certain number of signatures before it goes to council, then it has to go to council, there has to be a public meeting. It's a very long process, and by the time the question came up, it was too late to go for a ward system in this year. Quite honestly, throughout this term, I didn't even think about bringing it up. Between just getting on council and just starting to get my feet and understand what I was supposed to be doing, we were dealing with the pandemic, and I completely forgot about bringing it up again. So I do have it, and my intention is to have that discussion in this term if I do get reelected.
And that goes hand in hand with term limits. Man, I've heard, I really like term limits, but then, I've heard a lot of good arguments the other way that you lose some of the really good people that you have, not because you want to, but because you have to. So I'm kind of torn on that one now. I asked the question, what do you think about that?
I really think that term limits are important. I think that there's a time that you should be on. A lot of boards and committees have term limits. I believe that maybe a 3-term limit at City Council, possibly a 4, but I think 3. And the reason I'm saying that is the first term, it really takes a while to get to learn what you're doing. The second term, you sort of understand a little bit more, you come up with ideas, and then the third term, maybe you can finish the ideas. Sometimes things are done very quickly on City Council, and sometimes the bigger, more important issues take a couple of terms. What I would see happening, and this comes from the province, it's not a City of Niagara Falls decision. Term limits comes from the province. So it's not our decision to make, it would be a provincial decision. But what I see happening is, let's say it's 3 terms and then you have to go off for 1 term and then you could come back. What I do find in any organization, not just City Council, is if you have the same people on, they have the same experiences and they're only looking through that lens. It's important to have new people come on. It's important to have diverse people come on, whether that be age, gender, race, religion, because you have different perspectives. And I believe that anytime you have a team, you should have those diverse perspectives, because if you were all the same, you would be thinking all the same, and all of your attention, all of your money, all of your energy would be directed to those things only that those people thought of. So I think term limits help bring new people in, and I think that would be a benefit.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think, well, the mayor's not really that important, to tell you the truth. Sorry, Jim. But if you think about it, I mean, City Council makes the decisions. The mayor votes in tiebreakers, and he's basically, goes around the circle trying to convince people to do things that maybe they don't want to. Whatever, Ford wants to change that and make him a dictator. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but Yeah, I think that the mayor for 5 years and city councilors for 3 terms, and the mayor for 1 term or two terms, maybe 10 years or something like that.
I think the mayor should be the same as city council, whatever the term is, it would be the same. And because we are a two-tier government, the mayor also sits at the region. I know it's been stated in Niagara we have way too many politicians because we have 12 municipalities. You add up all the politicians. I think there is room for improvement. We've talked about amalgamating Niagara. That has come up in 2018. There were rumors again this time. There's a bunch of different models out there, whether it be one city for the region or 3 or 4 cities, to cut down the amount of politicians. We do have too many politicians. However, I believe that our 12 municipalities are very unique, and what Niagara Falls is very different than what a Port Colborne is or what a Niagara on the Lake is. So we need to think about those things as well.
Well, that might come down from the province anyway, whether anybody wants it or not. I mean, they've been sidestepped on that because of the COVID.
Exactly.
So they kind of lost focus on that. But before that, they were gung-ho. They want amalgamation. So my last question will be, because we've covered just about everything here, we've been around the city. We've taken a look at everything. Even our good friends in Chippewa got some mention over there. And I love Chippewa. It's great out there. And Chippewa, remember, get out and vote. You got enough people there to change this election. You can put somebody in if you want it out there. They have power, those people in Chippewa. I love them. Why should somebody vote for Lori Lococo?
Thank you, Paul. What I would say is I want people to first I want people to go out and vote. If they want to vote for me, that's great, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I'd like them to do is I would encourage them to learn about the candidates. Do your homework, whether that's reading the newspaper with the candidate's profile, whether that's listening to radio stations like this, whether that's going on the internet and looking up their website or different things that they've done. Learn about the candidates. And for the ones that connect with you and connect with the important issues for you, vote for them. You can vote for up to 8 candidates. You do not have to vote for 8 candidates. If you like one person, vote for one person. If you like 2 people, vote for 2. If you like 8, vote for 8. What I will offer is I believe that I'm a voice for a lot of our residents that don't feel that they have a voice at City Council right now. It goes back to that team that I was talking about. If you're all the same, then you're not bringing in other people's perspectives. So I believe that I'm a voice for a lot of people that don't have a voice at City Council, and I will not make any promises about how I'll vote for things because I look at them as individual items and look at the pros and cons. But what I will promise is that I do my homework and I do ask questions so I can understand and let our residents understand. So on October 24th or at the advance polls, I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
I thank you for coming in, Lori. It's been a pleasure. Also, I'll probably see you on the trail somewhere down the road. I want to thank all of our listeners for taking the time out of their day to listen to this very informative hour we've had here with Lori Lococo. My name is Paul Kalemir. This has been Your City, Your Voice. We're on daily, Monday to Friday at 12 noon sharp, high noon we call it. And we're on 4680Q. Tell your friends, 4680Q.com. Ciao for now. Have a great day, and thank you very much, Lori, for coming in today.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it.